What is going on, Gsluke community? We absolutely smashed in week 1 of 2023. Started it off with a bang like we were looking for, whether it was on Prize Picks, Showdown, for Draftkings week long. We had a lot of winners down there in the Discord. Was a solid week if you were following the channel. So looking to build on that momentum. But here in this stream, going to focus on last week from a more in-depth perspective. We're going to look at the chalk, ownership, perhaps a few of the surprises and projections around the industry. We'll go through my personal results, of course, all of your lineups in the community contest, which is going to be probably the most useful part for you, where I actually take a look at one of your lineups and give you a good old honest response to how it was going and maybe what you could improve or perhaps what went really well for you that week. So excited for it. Sit back, prepared to, kind of dick around here for half an hour to an hour, but I'm sure there'll be a few golden nuggets as we go through the slate that hopefully you can take and implement in your process going forward. Because if you're playing the same process every single week, so on and so forth, you're not going to get better at DFS. You should be constantly refining your process, finding holes in your game, because even some of the best players out there have plenty of things they can improve on, right? Blind spots to certain players. Perhaps their model isn't quite as fulsome or as full as it really should be. It doesn't have as many factors, that sort of thing. Those are all things that we need to consider week to week. So let's get this thing started. I see Nick's down there. I beat you by 4 points. Yeah, we were towards the middle of the pack, so it's not like we were going to win anything in that contest. But hey, I got you this week. We'll see about next week, though. I took down the contest right before the break, so I didn't get to come on to the channel here and kind of boast about that. But we'll have to win it next week so I can have those bragging rights. So let's bring up Draftkings. We're going to go through my results first. I'll bring up a few highlights from the Discord too. So if you were one of those players that went out there, had some success, I'm going to shout you out on here. So first, let's take a look at my exposure, where I played in 220 maxes. So I played a little bit lower volume, as I usually do for smaller field events. And we don't have 155 players. When you're not going to get a cut line, I tend to kind of tone back my exposure. And I was tempted the first week of 2023 to go out there, slam my usual like $1,500 to $2,000 in entries. But I tried to hold back a little bit, and maybe it was a mistake. We definitely would have cashed out, particularly if I had 150 bullets. I'm pretty confident we would have had maybe a top 5, perhaps even a GPP winning lineup, because even in my 20 max in this large field contest, nearly 20,000 entries, I got 60th place there in the top 100 so entries without Colin Morikawa. So obviously guys like a Hoagie went off for us, KH Lee, John Rahm, the winner, who I also had an outright ticket on. I know a lot of you out there also had those outright tickets. So that's always sweet to see. But this was far from a perfect lineup, right? 18th place for Viktor Hovland, and we were still sniffing the top of the leaderboard. That's because guys like a KH Lee were only 12% owned. If we go to the teams that actually ended up winning this sort of event, so let's go up here. First place is certainly going to have a Colin Morikawa as well. You can see Hoagie, KH Lee, Hovland was actually in the GPP winning lineup. Husker Heel also had Viktor Hovland just based on how many birdies he was able to make. That just shows you don't have to be perfect to go out there and take down these contests, because when we bring up the spreadsheet later on and I show you the actual optimal lineup, Viktor Hovland isn't in that lineup. So you don't have to have a perfect lineup even to win a 20,000 entry GPP, which I thought was just worth showing you. A few other lineups I had in this contest. I mean, you can see I had a Spieth in my second best lineup. So that's what I was complaining about with just the 20 lineups. If I had 150, I had almost all of the key pieces in the pool except for Morikawa. And to get to near the optimal score, you didn't have to have Colin Morikawa's points, because he was in that 9K range. There were a few other options like a Tony Finau in that range, who maybe slightly underperformed compared to a Colin Morikawa, but it wasn't by very much. So we were close. Over here on the other 20 max I did, this was the $1 20 max. Where we pretty much doubled up. So it wasn't anything drastic. That's why I was saying I kind of wish I put up my full volume this week. But this one was a Cantley lineup, which, was kind of the stinker there. Same thing with Jordan Spieth. Both of them just kind of average performances. But once again, that core down low of a KH Lee and then, of course, Tom Hoagie was kind of what carried our ROI, because, Hoagie's 20%, he was relatively chalky, but getting 12, 13% owned KH Lee, I mean, at a birdie fest, why were people not playing the guy? We know that he loves when conditions are easy. So that was pretty much a no-brainer for me. to show you guys some of the people that actually cashed out this week, because I pretty much just cashed out for pennies. So I'm not really going to flex about that all too much. Let me bring up the Discord and show you guys some what happens when a player pool really smashes. So let me share my screen. We'll bring up Discord this time, which I've never gone out there and actually done this before. So hopefully it shows up correctly. Let me see. Yeah, it looks pretty good there. Okay, so M. Juarez ended up taking down 7th place in a large single entry. You could see a very similar lineup to what I had. In fact, even worse than the one that I had up top, right? So I had Poston rather than a KH Lee, but that same core up top of players that I had across many lineups. Let's see, this guy, Damn Fools, Warful, one of my buddies, Dave down there, ended up taking down a few satellites, which is always nice. If you guys know, a lot of those satellite contests, you usually get a lot of value. A lot of times they overlay. A lot of times there's just lower level competition in them. So pretty solid that you went out there and did that. Good job. Meki fan here ended up cashing out for over 4x on the week. You can see a few single entries he cashed in. You see he finished in 1st place in a booster for $500. That's solid. You can see he actually finished in 1st place there against Mach Lovin, JPB. A couple of these guys up here that are professional PGA DFS players. So you beat the pros this week, bro. Good on you. Days, another good week there. You can see just cashing across the board. A few notes about Spieth. Yes, I'm going to be betting Jordan Spieth this week. We have my lineup there. Then Rage of Reason, who more than 20x'd this week. So he takes the prize there. He entered one lineup and it seemingly cashed in every single contest, and it scored 758 points. So in my 20 max, that was right about what I was scoring with the best of my 20 lineup. So week of the, so I'd say player of the week award goes to Rage of Reason down there, no doubt. Overall, ended up being a pretty solid week. Let's see, we got Marco down there. We just showed your lineups. What's going on, Marco? You got 2nd in the contest. Yeah, we're going to go through lineups here in a second. That's actually what we're going to do right now. And Travis Swenson says, fading the top guys, not an idea. Damn near finished last. Yeah, in this sort of field, bro, yeah, that's going to happen more often than not, right? Major championships, Hero World Challenge, when you get all the best players together, one of them is going to end up going off. So, yeah, maybe not the best idea, but you were definitely going for it, right? If they ended up busting, I mean, the ownership up top was staggering, right? You still had like 30% on Scotty. You had nearly 40% on John Rahm in some contests. I understand the idea. It was hyper aggressive, I'll say that, but hey, if it pays off, you're going to be running away with 1st place. So I don't want to condemn you there. So let's go through a few of the lineups. So the winner, of course, was Rage of Reason there in the community contest with his 758-point performance, which is pretty ridiculous. It was going to be hard to beat this in our single entry contest. It's not like I personally came very close. I finished in 10th place out of, like 23 entries, and one of them wasn't even entered. So really 22 entries. We had a decent lineup. Sam Burns was not great. He was also 40% owned in the community contest. Victor Hovland was over 50% in our community contest. We're going to have a lot to talk about with Victor later. He was super mega chalk out of nowhere this week. And anytime that happens, I like to talk about why it happens so we can try and figure out how to predict it in the future, because no one out there in their ownership projections was even close, was within like 3-4% on a Victor Hovland this week. So that's something that we're going to have to explore, was even more chalky in our community contest, which might be pretty telling, might help us out with a few clues as to why that was happening going forward. John Rahm was also over 50%, but that was a given. We love John Rahm. I talked about him extensively this week. I bet him outright. My favorite play on the board. So not a surprise that he won, not a surprise that he really cashed that outright ticket. In the video I did with DGen going over the preview for 2023, I said that John Rahm's just going to win in bunches this year. So there's tick number 1 with that. I expect another potentially 4 or 5 wins for John Rahm this year. I think it's going to be that type of year. It's going to be world number 1. I think he's going to run away with it here at some point this year. And the only player I think that really has anything to say about that is going to be Rory McIlroy. And you guys know my thoughts on Rory. I don't know if he's going to hold that up. Let's take a look at the 2nd place lineup for Marco down there. You actually had the same score as 24/7. So, okay, different lineup. I was going to see if you guys duped each other, because that would have been a highly improbable thing to have happen in just a 23 entry contest. But let's look at it. So you had Rahm up top, Finau. I loved that. That was my most common 1-2 punch up top. Tom Kim was great, a little bit higher owned in our contest, but don't worry about that, right? In large field GPPs, he was 17, 18%. That was a great source of leverage. I have the Victor Hovland again. We all love Hovland. We're going to have to talk about that later. I keep mentioning it. That ownership was just the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. JT Poston, okay, and Tom Hoagie. So if you would have pivoted off of a Poston and maybe took in a KH Lee, this lineup, and you probably would have had to spend down somewhere else, right, to afford that, would have been close to the nuts. Because if you could have taken, maybe go down, go up to the KH Lee with a JT Poston, go down from like a Hovland to, I guess, a Jordan Spieth, right, would only be like a couple point differential. This lineup could have potentially taken down the contest. Let's see, right? KH Lee was $7,000, so $200 more expensive, and he scored 120 points. And then you had, so like a 20-point difference or like a 2-point difference on Hovland. Yeah, so that would be the only improvement I could see. Overall, I'm sure this cashed out all over the place. Like you sent down in the Patreon. No complaints. You had enough low-owned players, right? An 18% Tom Kim was, I don't want to call him a true pivot because that is slightly above the average ownership for the field. But in the AK range, that's not chalk by any means, right? That's right about the average. So like that is a pivot. I like the JT Poston leverage. He was a lot lower owned in actual GPPs than he was in this contest. And love Tom Hoagie, right? He was super cheap. He was kind of like a free square down there in the 6K range. I love it. And I like how aggressive you were down low. I like the fact that you skipped that 7K range. I kind of talked about that in a few of my streams, just went down into the 6K and tried to fit in as many studs as possible. That's how I build in single entries. So the fact that you did that as well, I want to say that that's a good idea. And the reason for it, right, is if you can find 2, maybe even 3 guys down there in the 6K range that you'd like, you can take the 3 best players in the field and put them in that lineup, right? Or in this case, you only took 2 of them, put 4 of the top 15, 20 players in the field in your lineup. That's capturing a lot of the win equity. I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised if Tom Kim won this event. Tony Finau, he could have easily won. And I mean, Hovland, right? I know he finished in 18th place. It's not like he couldn't have won this event. He has more than enough firepower. I love what you were doing there. So have to say, great lineup there. Let's go through a few of the other lineups that kind of caught my eye. So the other lineup that finished in second place was 24/7. Very similar lineup, had the same 3 guys up top, Aram, Finau, and Tom Kim. He went with Sanjay, who was a little bit more chalky, which he wasn't my favorite play this week, I have to say, but scored 112 points. He didn't hurt you for sure, so I understand getting to him. Aaron Wise and JJ Spawn. So the only thing I'll say about this lineup, it's a little bit chalky. I mean, your lowest owned player is JJ Spawn, and let's see, in GPPs, what was his ownership? I feel like it was, so it was 11.5%. Okay, I'm okay with that. Single entry, that's enough leverage. Let's go over to Nick's lineup. I know he's down there in chat. So he also went with Rom. He had Burns like me. So that's what sunk both of us, to be quite frank. I had Max Homa, who scored 135 points. The thing that surprises me, guys, is a lot of these GPP winning lineups didn't have Max Homa in them. I don't know if you guys noticed that when we were going through them. In the $1.20 max, the lineup didn't have a Max Homa in it. He was one of your top scorers, right? He finished in 3rd place, had multiple eagles, a bogey-free round, multiple streaks of 3 straight birdies. That surprises me. That just shows you that you don't have to have that perfect lineup. But yeah, Nick down here, he also had Burns. Let's go through this. So ownership-wise, your lowest owned player was Burns, and then KH Lee. So you had 2 close to pivots there. I like that. You had a few. Yeah, I mean, if Victor Hovland came in owned like we expected, right? Like if he was that 20 to 25% that the entire industry was projecting for, this would have been a great lineup. But kind of like my lineup here, right, where I also had a Hovland, the fact that I had a 35-40% owned John Rahm and a 30-35% owned Victor Hovland. At some contests, Hovland was like 40% owned this week, which is just outrageous to me. That I didn't feel great about. So, I mean, all of these lineups up here, like they all had Victor Hovland as well. Like in hindsight, I don't feel great about that, right? You can see Rage Reason didn't have him and he ended up taking down the contest there. Maybe that just shows you that just it's hard to get leverage on the rest of the field when you have 2 players like that. So obviously hindsight's 2020. So maybe we try to avoid that in the future, but I love the KH Lee play. It's obviously one of my favorite plays on the slate, 120 points. Sahith Theegala could have easily played a lot better. In terms of your score, that's really what kind of killed you. I mean, the Sam Burns one, he killed 40% of this contest. So that was kind of like everyone went down with the ship. But Sahith kind of screwed you there, right? If Sahith If you replace him with even just like a 95, 100 point scorer in this field, you're what? You're at like 780, 790 in terms of points, up there in the top 10. Yeah, that's probably the one foul piece for you, Nick. So let's go ahead, bring up our projections now. This is going to be a deep dive into exactly how I did in terms of projections this week, and really where we're going to dive into the game theory aspect, where ownership levels like Victor Hovland went through the roof. So we're going to start with Victor Hovland, okay? Because this happens like once a month, where like one of these just like really likable players is way higher owned than everybody else. And let's talk about it. So for 4-round contest, I thought he was going to be 23.6% owned. He came in 35% owned. That was nearly 12% off. That's dog shit. When you're getting an ownership projection off by that much, that should be flagged in your system as like, okay, what went wrong there? So that was a little bit of a red flag there. Xander, that was just due to the injury, right? This should have been expected, that the ownership projection was a little bit too high because of an overreaction to the injury. I'm okay with that one. But the 12% on Victor Hovland, when there weren't any red flags like that, it's not like anybody in this range came in way lower owned than we expected. I mean, look at this, right? Like Sam Burns, slightly lower owned, right? You can see actually Max Homa came in a little bit higher owned than I expected. Up here with a Tom Kim, he was pretty much right at the ownership level. It came down to people not wanting to play this bottom end range, which is what I really wanted to show this for, right? So you look at the actual ownership numbers down low. Ches Reavie, 0.81% owned. Down here, Luke List, 3.81% owned, 0.62, 1.33 for a Chad Ramey. All of those projections, were a little bit lower, right? I projected higher ownership. You figured people would want to differentiate their lineups, that sort of thing, try and save some salary down low, but people took the safe approach. They tried to take players in this top of the 6K range, right? Where you have the Hoagies of the world, the JT Postons, the Cage Lees that ended up paying off. The bottom of the 7K range, even where you had, Sahith, Seamus Power, who was also relatively chalky. Players didn't want to take that hyper aggressive approach where you're taking, let's say, not only just one player up top, but potentially two of them, right? And differentiating your lineup construction that way. Because of people not wanting to play the bottom end of the board, I think they had to fit in another 8K option. And, he was projected to be, let's see, the second highest owned player in this range, right after Sungjae Im. So rather than people wanting to get to the quote unquote, chalky Sungjae Im, right, who actually came in lower owned than a Victor Hovland, they galaxy brained themselves into all playing Victor Hovland. This is what we call groupthink. This is dangerous. This is what happens when people all start thinking the same way in DFS. But it's also something that when we recognize it happening, you can directly leverage. And this is why I'm so excited about. This is like one of the more important things that you can learn from this week, is that going into the future, if we're careful enough, if we realize with lineup construction that people are being funneled into a certain range, we might be able to identify the next Victor Hovland, right? That's going way higher round than anybody expects. And I know it was only like 12%, but that's huge, right? I played 40%. I tried to get leverage at 40%, and I only had 4.7% over the field. I essentially paid the rake playing a Victor Hovland this week, which if you do that enough times in a player pool, will decimate your long-term ROI. That's the issue with it. You need to be getting at least like 1.4, 1.5x leverage to the field. That's usually like the minimum that I'm going for. I'm not somebody that always plays 2x leverage. I've said that many times here on the channel. I've probably had that rant one too many times. But Victor Hovland, 4.7% leverage is not getting it done, not even close to it. So that's the important thing I wanted to point out from the ownership perspective. A few other guys that maybe came in a little bit off the ownership projections would be, where's Seamus Power down here? Seamus Power, he was 7.1% higher owned than I expected. A lot of that comes down to recent form. I expected after the break, maybe people to kind of throw recent form to the side, but it looks like people were taking it a little bit more seriously than as previously imagined, which I think is a mistake. I just want to point that out. Seamus Power had a great fall season, but he also had a month off of golf. It's not realistic to expect him to come back and play well. And he only scored 95 points, right? So he didn't even have that good a week. So, the ownership was higher than I expected, but maybe that's a good thing, right? The field got burned by him a little bit more. And up top, there was one more I wanted to point out. We talked about the Xander one, right? That was due to the injury. Sam Burns, I guess, a little bit lower owned, and then Cam Young here a little bit higher owned than I expect. But those were about 4 or 5% off. That's going to happen every single week. The ones that you got to keep an eye on is when it gets above a 10% differential, right? Like here with the Victor Hovland, that's sizable because a 5% difference, you can see I played, what was it, 40% Cameron Young, 30%, right? So I got 1.5x leverage. You can live with that, right? Like I said, between like 1.4, 1.5x leverage to 2.5x is the range you want to live in. That's okay, right? We're right there, right around 1.4x. Let's see, on Sam Burns, I actually got a little bit of extra leverage, was closer to like 2.5x, sorry, closer to 2.5x leverage. That's also something that I can live with. It's not ideal, right? In an ideal world, want to have perfect ownership projections, but that's impossible, right? You just want to be as close as humanly possible. Let's see, in terms of projected my leverage, I guess this is important to show you guys. I'm somebody that either goes all in or all off of a player. So you can see over here on my exposure tab, this is how much I played every month in my pool. I'm either going all in or all out, right? So if I'm, have somebody out of my player pool, it means I'm playing 0%. So up there with the John Rahm, I got 70%. I had 45% Patrick Cantlay, Tony Finau 40. It was relatively flat across the board. You can see down here in the 8K range, everyone was between 30 and 40%. It wasn't like I was going 50, 60% on any one player. The 40% on Victor Hovland was a mistake in hindsight. He should have been closer to at least 50% owned in my player pool, if not higher. Jordan Spieth 35, and down low was also flat. The only guy I really put all of my eggs into one basket on was Tom Hoge, because he was like by far the best play on the slate. In terms of points per dollar, he lapped the field in that category. In terms of form, in terms of course fit, he was checking every single box. And I thought he was going to be like 20% owned. So, I went for the 2.5x leverage. And we pretty much accomplished exactly that. So he was probably my top play on the slate. The one that made me the most money this week was a Tom Hoge. Let's see. I took a pretty decent stance on an Aaron Wise, 45%. That's a little bit more aggressive than the other players in this range. Didn't really pay off or hurt me. They're at 103 points, but that's worth noting. And let's see, I guess the Sam Burns take, right, where I went for 2.5x leverage, that was a little bit more aggressive than most of the other plays in my player pool. So I think those are the main things worth noting from the ownership side. But that's all we've got. We've got a lot of content to do today, boys. So going forward, make sure to stop by on the Wednesday live stream to get the link to the community contest. You don't want to review your lineup? No, I'm bringing yours up now. Travis, we're bringing yours up now. I wanted to check chat to see if anyone down there wanted their lineups reviewed, but we'll see. So let's go. Let's bring up your lineup here. All right. And maybe you don't want it reviewed, but we're going to go through it, Travis. We're going to get better at DFS together, right? So your lineup didn't do great. That's okay. But in terms, you had a few chalky pieces. That would be the one thing I'd say was like Hovland and Sanjay together is a little bit of a tough scene. I don't know, man. It's not as bad as it could have been. You had a really good leverage play in Adam Svensson down low. I love that. I loved Adam Scott this week. He sucked. Like I played Adam Scott and he absolutely blew this week. So I was right there with you in a few of my personal lineups. I have no issues with this. Honestly, other than Sanjay M and Svensson, I had the other four guys, right? Like I had Hovland, Finau, Cantlay, and Scott in lineups. And I was totally fine with Svensson this week. I actually thought he was a pretty good play. It's not a bad lineup, bro. You had enough leverage there. You took some chalk, but it's a single entry, right? You don't have to worry about that all that much. And you didn't take Rahm up top. So, taking Cantlay as your first man in was leveraging a good portion of this contest, right? Over 50% of it right there. You could have easily taken it down. Your guys just had a bad week. That's what happens with DFS sometimes. So don't beat yourself up too much about that. Chandler says, hope everything went well for you at the TOC. Join the Discord link. So send me a message on there. It's something that expires every few days, so people can't just like save the link and then send it to other people. So message me on Patreon and I can send you the link. I got you on there, Chandler. Or message me on Discord. If you have me on there as a friend, just message me and I'll send you an invite. But that's all I've got, boys. We'll be doing this every single week. Hopefully going forward, the community contest will just get bigger and bigger. It's not always going to be all to first place. So they'll start to have a payout structure involved. There's going to be up to 50 players this week. I'm going to be dropping it on every single video that I talk about to try and get more and more people in the contest, because the more the merrier, right? The more players, the more like true the ownership is going to be. Like there's a lot more variance when you only have 5 to 10 players. Guys like a Victor Hovland, John Rahm are going to be nearly 50, 60% owned. So the bigger we can make it, the more lineups we can have to review here to give you guys even more insight into the process, the better. So we're going to be doing this, even if it's a slow start here with trying to get traction. I like doing it. I like going into my process, trying to, figure out things I can improve on and, giving you guys that sort of transparency, right? Even some of the best players in the world don't have it all figured out, and nobody does. Everybody can be improving their process out there. So hopefully this is a good example of what you guys can do to do so. But best of luck. Thank you guys for stopping by as per usual. And I will catch you guys for the content throughout the day. We'll have a course breakdown dropping, core picks dropping later on tonight, our live stream on Wednesday as per usual. Super stoked to go ahead and add to the bankroll once more.